Okay, so the one thing that everybody remembers from high school or middle school, right, is that mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. And yeah, it's for a reason. So mitochondria and chloroplasts are the power plants of their respective cells. So mitochondria are the sites of this process called cellular respiration. And that's the metabolic process that uses oxygen to make ATP, the molecule that we use to store energy for the cell. Um, so we're going to have a future lecture just about cellular respiration and the importance of, what it does and why it makes mitochondria the powerhouse of the cell. And then similarly in plants, chloroplasts are the sites of the process called photosynthesis, and they make energy in plants and some algae. And so that also will get its own future lecture for photosynthesis and how chloroplasts make energy through photosynthesis. So yeah, we're kind of lumping these together because they're both power plants. They generate energy in the form of ATP and organic molecules. And I'll still talk a little bit more about each one though. So mitochondria and chloroplasts are super interesting. That they have many similarities with bacteria. And so these similarities led to what's called the endosymbiont theory. And so this theory suggests that an early ancestor of eukaryotes engulfed in oxygen using non-photosynthetic prokaryotic cell. And they kind of just formed a relationship with each other, like they helped each other out. The eukaryotic cell is like, hey, thanks for making energy for me. And the mitochondrion precursor prokaryote was like, hey, thanks for like giving me a home and feeding me, basically. And so they kind of formed this symbiotic relationship. So the engulfed cell formed a relationship with the host cell and they became an endosymbiont. And so over time, the endosymbionts evolved into mitochondria. And then later on, at least one of these cells may have then taken up a photosynthetic prokaryote, and that evolved into a chloroplast. And so we know that the mitochondria came first because plant cells, even though they have chloroplasts, they also have mitochondria. So the mitochondria must have evolved first, and then some kind of eukaryotic ancestor cell also ate a photosynthetic prokaryote, and that evolved into a chloroplast. And so we think this because we think that they were each prokaryotes because they have a lot of similarities. So similarities between mitochondria and chloroplasts that support this theory. They're both enveloped by a double membrane. They both have free ribosomes inside and circular DNA molecules. That's not typically pictured, but yeah, the fact that they have their own ribosomes and their own DNA. Wait, wasn't that stuff that cells would have? Yes. And they also grow and reproduce somewhat independently in cells. So it's super interesting. Here is a picture kind of showing this theory. So this is an ancestor of eukaryotic cells. And it happened to engulf a non-photosynthetic prokaryote that was able to use oxygen. And that's necessary because, yeah, we'll talk about it in the cellular respiration lecture, but you need oxygen. Mitochondria literally need oxygen, and that's why we breathe in oxygen and need to breathe. We need to power the mitochondria. So some ancestor of eukaryotic cells engulfed in oxygen-using non-photosynthetic prokaryote, and then over time that became a mitochondria. And then at least one of these at some point took up a photosynthetic prokaryote, and then it just evolved over time to become a chloroplast. And now this is a photosynthetic eukaryote. So yeah, it's super interesting. So to zoom in a little bit more on mitochondria, so they are found in nearly all eukaryotic cells. They have a smooth outer membrane and then an inner membrane that's folded into cristae. And so anytime in biology you see something that's like very foldy, that is to increase surface area. So that's to like make even more energy, basically. So that inner membrane has two compartments. There's the intermembrane space, so that's between the two membranes, the intermembrane space. And then the most inside spot is called the mitochondrial matrix. And so some metabolic steps of cellular respiration are catalyzed inside that mitochondrial matrix. And yeah, that the cristae being so like foldy is to make a large surface area for all the enzymes that make ATP, so to make even more energy. So here's a better picture of a mitochondrion. So yeah, singular is mitochondrion, more than one, plural is mitochondria. So in a cartoon, here's the outer membrane, there's the intermembrane space, an inner membrane, and then the mitochondrial matrix inside. And so yeah, mitochondria have their own DNA, their own ribosomes, so it's super interesting, right? And sometimes you might, we picture them on their own, but they can fuse and form like this huge network. So here's a protist called euglena. It's kind of large. It is a eukaryote, even though it's a single cell, because it has a nucleus, and so there's DNA in the nucleus, and then there's also some DNA inside of the mitochondria. So that's why on that slide about the nucleus, it says the nucleus contains most of the cell's DNA. It's because mitochondria have their own. Crazy. So chloroplasts are kind of similar. Chloroplasts have the green pigment called chlorophyll, as well as enzymes and other molecules that function in photosynthesis. So chloroplasts themselves aren't green, but they have pigment molecules inside that are green. And so chloroplasts are found in leaves and other green organs of plants and in algae. So the chloroplast structure includes, again, a double membrane. There's an outer membrane. You can kind of see an inner membrane. There are these green stacks. So again, it's kind of hard to see in this low resolution picture. So there are thylakoids, these like membranous sacs. And then these guys can be stacked to form a granum. So just one of these little membranous sacs is a thylakoid, but you can have stacks of thylakoids and that forms a granum. And then there's also this fluid that fills up the inside called stroma. And so the chloroplast is one of a group of plant organelles called plastids. So here's a better picture. So all together, this is a chloroplast, and here's a TEM image. So there's an outer membrane, an inner membrane, intermembrane space. Chloroplasts have their own DNA and also their own ribosomes. And then there is one stack, or one sac, that is a thylakoid. So if you could see at the bottom of this stack, there's just one. It looks like a pancake. So the one pancake is called a thylakoid. But the stack of pancakes and multiple thylakoids are called grana. And yeah. Another one that your textbook kind of grouped together with this are peroxisomes. And so peroxisomes are specialized metabolic compartments bounded by a single membrane. And so peroxisomes contain enzymes that remove the hydrogen atoms from various substances and then transfer them to oxygen. And this ends up forming hydrogen peroxide, or H2O2. And then these reactions have many different functions. So the functions of peroxisomes kind of depends. So some use oxygen to break fatty acids into smaller molecules. And then those are eventually used for fuel for respiration. In the liver, peroxisomes detoxify alcohol and other harmful compounds. And then in plant seeds, there are glyoxysomes in the fat-storing tissues of plant seeds that convert fatty acids to sugar to feed the seedlings. So yeah, I kind of know how to put this in the whole hierarchy because it's in the textbook is lumped with mitochondria and chloroplasts. So they're kind of related, but we don't know how yet. So I didn't put like a heading letter or number. So anyway, the cytoskeleton. So kind of like our skeleton is for our bodies. The cytoskeleton functions in support and motility for cells. So the cytoskeleton is a network of fibers that extends throughout the cytoplasm. So we don't typically show it. We just show like a circle and then all the different organelles, but there's actually a whole bunch of fibers throughout the cytoplasm. And so the cytoskeleton organizes the cell structures and activities and anchors many organelles. So it'll make a little bit more sense when I show a picture. And the cytoskeleton is made of 3 types of molecular structures: microtubules, microfilaments, and intermediate filaments. So here's a picture of the cytoskeleton. So yeah, even though we show the diagrams of these cells and just show the organelles, it's kind of implied that there's a whole cytoskeleton throughout the cell. So in this cell, the blue is the nucleus, again, the most conspicuous, the largest one. And then all these different fibers are the different kinds of fibers of the cytoskeleton. So the green is one kind of fiber, the like orangey red is another kind, and then the yellow is like another kind. So we will talk about the different kinds of molecular structures. And so yeah, altogether, the cytoskeleton helps to support the cell and maintain its shape. In some kinds of cells, it interacts with motor proteins to help produce cell motility, meaning like movement. And then inside the cell, vesicles and other organelles can use motor protein feet to kind of like crawl along the tracks provided by the cytoskeleton. So here's an example of a vesicle, and then it can have little like feet that walk along the cytoskeleton. So interesting, right? Like it's not just stuff floating around the cell. There's this whole network of like roads basically for the cell. So the 3 main types of fibers that make up the cytoskeleton are microtubules, microfilaments, and intermediate filaments. Microtubules are the thickest of the 3 components of the cytoskeleton. Microfilaments, also called actin filaments, are the thinnest components. And then intermediate filaments are kind of intermediate. They're medium. They're fibers with diameters in like a middle range. So here is a summary table of the structure and function of the different structures. So microtubules are kind of hollow. These are measurements of like width or length. So 20 nanometers, 25 nanometers. So again, those are the thickest ones. Intermediate are like middle, intermediate. And then the microfilaments or actin filaments are the skinniest ones. And then these are some examples of them and what they do. But I'm still going to talk about it on the next few slides. So microtubules are hollow rods that are about 25 nanometers in diameter and about 200 nanometers to 25 microns long. So meters are a unit of measurement, a meter, and then in the metric system. And so you can just add a prefix to say how big or how small, like how many of the meters. Is it like one fraction of a meter? Is it many meters? So a nanometer is very small. Yeah. And so microtubules are constructed of dimers of tubulin, and the functions of microtubules are to shape the cell, to guide movement of the organelles, and separate chromosomes during cell division. In animal cells, microtubules grow out from a structure called the centrosome near the nucleus. And in animal cells, the centrosome has a pair of centrioles, and then each has 9 triplets of microtubules arranged in a ring. So let's the centrosome, which is 1, has a pair of centrioles. And they have microtubules arranged in a ring. So it kind of looks like a trudel. So other eukaryotic cells organize microtubules just in a different way, in the absence of those centrosomes and centrioles. And then here's cross-section of a centriole, and then the microtubules that come out. So microtubules also control the beating of structures called flagella and cilia. These are microtubule containing extensions that project from some cells. So I'll show a picture on the next slide. Well, let me just show it. So for example, if you were to think of a sperm cell, that is a flagella. It's like a long hair-like structure that actually moves and helps that kind of cell swim. And then cilia are another kind of structure that stick out from the cell. They're smaller, but there's usually more of them, and then they move around and help move some cell types. So it's microtubules that help control the beating of those structures, the flagella or the cilia. Many unicellular protists are moved through water by cilia or flagella. And motile cilia are found in large numbers on a cell surface, but flagella, there's only usually like one or a few per cell. And then they are different in their beating patterns. So this picture kind of shows how they move. Flagella kind of move a little bit more like snake-like, and they move something forward, but cilia stay stationary and they move a little bit, but they help the organism move like that to the side, I guess. So yeah, they have different movements. And cilia and flagella do share a common structure. So even though they look pretty different, they have a common structure like this. So there's a group of microtubules that are like sheathed, which is kind of covered in an extension of the plasma membrane. There are 9 doublets of microtubules that are arranged in a ring with 2 single microtubules in the center. There's a basal body that anchors the cilium or flagellum, and there's a motor protein called dynein, which drives the bending movements of a cilium or flagellum. So yeah, there's all these different numbers, right? There's doublets, and then there's 2 single microtubules in the center. There's a basal body that kind of like anchors it. And then there's a motor protein called dynein, which drives that bending movements. Dynein has 2 feet that walk along microtubules. It's kind of how it makes the movement happen. One foot maintains contact while the other releases and then goes further along. And so movements of the feet cause those microtubules to bend rather than slide because the microtubules are held in place. Pause here.